Are you ready to enter the big dream with Lonely Robot? Well, let's dive in and find out. The Big Dream by Lonely Robot. So, Lonely Robot is the side project, or I guess the main solo project from John Mitchell. John Mitchell is a pretty prolific musician within the progressive rock, or at least the neo-progressive rock scene. Where I heard him from first was Frost and his amazing work that he's done with the band. He's also worked with Arena as well as It Bites and Kino, so he's got quite the prolific resume behind him. And for most of what I've heard with his music, I love. And I love that kind of neo-prog that's a little bit more theatrical, that's a little bit more symphonic, that's a little bit more, I almost want to say like aggressively technologically present. I guess that would be the best way to put it. And so The Big Dream is actually the second studio album from Lonely Robot. And Lonely Robot, the first album of Please Come Home, I wasn't a real big fan of. Like, I appreciated a number of songs off of that album. I really loved the first song, but the rest of the sounds and songs on it just didn't really leave too much of an impact for me. I think because my expectations were a little bit lower, I found that I enjoyed this album a lot more. The concept alone is one that really resonates for me. I mean, the overall concept of this album is, I almost want to say like the robot's idea of death and what death really means. They use this recorded speech over and over and over again within the album of what is it like to die? We really don't know. The closest that we've ever come to knowing or experiencing death is when you fall asleep but you don't dream or you don't remember falling to sleep, like there's just a gap in time. The thought experiment that comes about that is, well, what if you go to sleep and then just never wake up? Like, the big dream being, if you don't dream and there's just this gap in time, well, what happens if you don't wake up? And that thought experiment, it hits a really personal part in me, and I think that really elevated my enjoyment of the music. But overall, within this music, it's kind of more of the same within what we found within the first aspect, but I think it's a little bit more mature and a little bit more realized. Within the first album of Please Come Home, it was kind of wandering the landscape, a little too poppy, a little too accessible. Here, it still has that poppy aspect and that accessibleness, but I feel like it's in a little bit of a darker tinge. And it's that darker tinge that I love from like the neo-prog from like the late 90s. And so it's got a very heavy emphasis on keyboards and playing around a little bit with the guitar work. And John's vocals on here is really one of the star performers. He's really starting to come into his own being the lead singer on this album, and I know he's kind of like the lead head, but it feels more like he's taking control of his own vocal presence on this album. And this is definitely found within the third track of Sigma. When we come into the chorus of this, where he's just kind of saying, Sigma, Sigma, that's where I'm just like, yes, finally, he's coming into his own, he's really grabbing the song by the horns. And the song that preceded this, of Awakenings, these two songs do a really great dance at showing the dark light of this particular band, almost like a neon type of a color with the darkness all around it. And that's kind of like the overall feel that we have. So the first couple of tracks, the prologue being the Deep Sleep, which really kind of solidifies that concept, Awakenings and Sigma, all three of these tracks do a really great job of opening up the album in an accessible way as well, because these songs are a little bit shorter in terms of like progressive rock, like they're about 5 minutes-ish. And that light dark is also resonant within this the heaviness of these tracks. Like there are very light pieces within, say, the Floral Green, where we have almost like that robotic sound, but then we also have those rocker moments within like the False Light, where it's very heavy and very like forefrontal, and it's more of those heavy moments that I found with Frost. Those are very key on this album as well. But we also have like very, very accessible songs as well. Like The Divine Art of Being is almost like a straight up pop song at times, where I almost feel a little bit disconnected with how poppy it is, but a lot of these songs are also very, very catchy. Like Symbolic is a very great treat, and it's that energy that I love, and I guess Symbolic would be the best example of the energy that's really, really felt on this album. It's that jam session that we have on there, and that jam session is what really keeps me coming back, and I think that was what was missing from the first album, is that jam, and the fun aspect that we have with him as well.
You are never going to be absolute control of what goes on because it's work.
But then we come into one of my favorite pieces, which is the title track of The Big Dream. And it's purely instrumental, except for the ending, which is more of like a plea or the revisiting of that concept again with, again, kind of with the Please Come Home Lonely Robot, which kind of harkens back to the first album, which kind of ties the two together, and that's always a fun treat. But this song actually starts off with a sound effect that IQ uses quite a bit, especially within their live performances. But the song itself is still an amazing treat, and I love the guitar work that's near the end of the track as well. It just really pays off that whole jam session, and that is that jam session that I'm talking about. And then finally we have Epilogue, and Epilogue is just a great way to close off the album, and this is a much better kind of cohesive whole. So, I mean, overall, I still really enjoyed this album, but it's not really one to kind of write home about. It never really had a moment that elevated me to the same extent that, say, the first track of the first album did, but the overall enjoyment of the album for me is still really great. So I'd probably have to say stream this album. It's still one that you would have to check out, one that I would recommend for anybody that likes this type of music to definitely go and check out. So that's about it. What did you guys think of this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? If you haven't checked it out, I would actually recommend it. Give it a listen and let me know of your own thoughts by commenting down below. Thank you guys as always so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.
10,000 lights.